Good evening. My name is Bill Klein. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Ford Site Planning Task Force that's been working on this for some time, and I'd like to welcome you all here this evening. I thank you for being here as well, because the world belongs to those who show up, and if you want to have a voice, you better show up and speak your mind at the time. We have a number of meetings coming up in the near future, starting with the following meeting in April 16th that's going to deal with bicycle, pedestrian, and transit. There'll be a meeting on April 30th regarding streets, parking, and traffic, and one scheduled for May 21st on stormwater and other infrastructure. We will announce later the location for these meetings, and there will be several other meetings as we go through the summer, and we'll get information about those to you as those get established. One of the slides will provide information on how you can find out more about the task force's work. There's a site on the city's website, and if you would like to leave your email address at the sign-in sheet, we'll make sure that we get you email notices of all of these future meetings as well. So there's a lot of ways to stay connected. Our agenda tonight is a brief welcome by me. I was told to present a joke to start, but I don't have one, so you get spared that. I'm going to turn it over to Councilman Tolbert in a second for some remarks, and then we're going to be going through a presentation over the next roughly 25 minutes. Following that 25-minute presentation, you will be able to provide input. There are tables set out in this room and in the next room, and how you can provide that input will be explained to you as we go through the process. But again, I want to thank you all for being here. We appreciate your input. This is our neighborhood, and it's important that we have a say in what goes on here. And with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to Councilman Chris Tolbert, who has a few remarks for you.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for being here, and thank you for the task force for their continued work on this project and hosting this meeting, as they have so many other meetings. The parks and open space component of this is, in my opinion, one of the most important components to have a successful 21st century community that brings the entire neighborhood and this entire site together. I think from the neighborhood perspective, it's probably one of the most important components that we can think about, or that is important to us in terms of what kind of open space and what kind of parks we're going to have. This site is very fortunate to be on the banks of the Mississippi River. It's a site that is blessed in natural beauty, and it makes me think back to what we wrote in 2011 and passed as a council about the Great River Passage. We want, in terms of our parks and open space, more natural, more urban, and more connected. And I think in a general sense, that's similar to what the general consensus is about parks and open space around the Ford site. I've heard lots of ideas, and we know there's a lot of important priorities around the parks and open space, whether it's parkland, general open space, the ball fields, softball fields, soccer fields, so many different things to discuss. And we know that throughout our community, that parkland and open space are important for strong neighborhoods and strong communities as we go forward. One of the things that I think is important for us also to think about, beyond just the active or inactive parkland or open space, is what is the focal point of this site going to be to bring the whole neighborhood together, to bring the entire community of Highland Park and the city of St. Paul together. And we think about focal points at parks across the country and across the city and across the state. For example, Mears Park, one of our most beautiful parks in Lower Town, the focal point is that stream. Or we go across the other side of downtown St. Paul, where we have Rice Park, where the focal point, like many focal points of parks, is a fountain. Or you go to Chicago and you see the focal point of Millennium Park, which is that bean. We think about these focal points, and what is that focal point going to be for our community, for our neighborhood, and for our city? As we move forward, we know there's going to be a natural tension between what we as a neighborhood expect and want in terms of how much parkland, how much open space, etc., with what is feasible and reasonable for a developer to add in terms of that. But we must know that we need to set that expectation and set that vision and set that priorities and continue our brainstorming now. And that's really what this is. It's a continuation of that brainstorming, a continuation of setting those priorities, and continuing to think about and dream about what we could expect. So thank you all for being here tonight. I know this will be a very productive experience, and I appreciate everyone's continued involvement in this site because it's so important for our community. So I think Merritt's up next. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Council Member, and welcome to everyone this evening. We will go through the next part of the presentation as quickly as we can so we can move on to the important part of the evening, which is an hour for you to move around the room and provide us your thoughts and feedback on the topics we're bringing forward tonight. So I'm Merritt Clapp-Smith. I'm a principal city planner with St. Paul, and I work as kind of the project coordinator for the Ford redevelopment planning. So we have been working on Ford since 2007. Shortly after Ford announced it would close the plant, we initiated a planning process. And if some of you remember, in 2007, we had a lot of community meetings to talk about redevelopment ideas for the site. The task force worked with the community, different stakeholders, and came up with some ideas and kind of key principles and 5 scenarios for the redevelopment. Since that time, we've been doing different studies that have evaluated and refined what the ideas that were brought forward in that first work. And we've been filtering them down now to priorities and questions. So this past year, city staff really looked at all the different information and said, what are priorities and what are the questions we still have? So the point we're at this year, and this meeting is the first of a number of meetings to do this, is we are evaluating and refining those priorities for each of these different topics we'll be addressing related to Ford. We will use that feedback to inform what we do for zoning on the site and developing a public realm network that will be brought to the City Council early next year. And then that will set the stage for redevelopment planning with a master developer when Ford sells the property. So we have a number of principles across our different topics for Ford. And some of you might have seen these if you were at our big public meeting in November. So these are the key principles related to parks and open space. Making strong connections to the Mississippi River within the site and to the neighborhood, creating natural spaces and active places for people to play, relax, and interact, including the Little League fields. That came out pretty strongly, the interest in retaining the Little League fields in the community in that first planning work. To use significant greenery, public art, and cultural activities to create an attractive and vibrant community, and to reflect the heritage of Ford, the Ford plant and its employees through design and amenities at the site. So these are the 4 big, sort of broad principle statements that everything we do should help advance. So as I said, we've been doing lots of work over different years, and all of this work informs priorities that are being developed around open space for the site. Now, some of the work has been Ford related, like the one at the top, the Ford Site Open Space Guidelines project that was worked in 2011. But a lot of the work is through neighborhood plans or different parks planning, and all of the information from this work has helped to shape what our priorities are. So what is open space? We use the term open space a lot. We thought we should define it. So how we are using open space through this project is it's publicly owned, and it can be natural lands, athletic fields, recreational land, community gathering places, recreational buildings. So any of those, if they're on public land that the city is managing, we'll consider them open space as part of the Ford site. They do not include privately owned land or plazas, stormwater areas that are private, things like that. How big is the Ford site? A reminder here, the main Ford site plus the Canadian Pacific Rail Yard together is 135 acres. So you can see that's the main property east of Mississippi River Boulevard. I have put an X through the property that Ford owns along the river. That is 22 acres. Ford does own it. And it may be that they decide to sell that parcel or part of that parcel in the future. But it was not included in the early planning work and conversations we had with the community. And because it has some utility buildings that Ford is considering for some sort of reuse, and there is a former dump site there that's under active review with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, we're not really certain what the disposition future of that property is going to be. So we are not including it as part of the conversation at this time for consideration of open space that would relate to the site. It may become that in the future, we don't know, but for now we've sort of taken it off the table since we're not certain. Parkland dedication. Some of you may know that the city has a parkland dedication requirement. Many communities do, where at the time of new development, there is a dedication of some fee or lands for new parks to support the new development. The city right now is revising its parkland requirement, and we have made an attempt to estimate how much parkland dedication would result from the development that's anticipated at this site. Now again, this is a requirement that's just being considered by the city now. We've based it on that. And the proposed requirement is that 9% of development area, not including the streets, should be dedicated or could ask to be dedicated as park. And so we've done a rough calculation for the site and estimated that that might be about 9 acres for a site of this size. So we've sort of tried to estimate streets, how much space they'll take up, and come up with about 9 acres. This number may change, but we want to put that forward because that's really the starting point the city has to say, all right, well, we kind of know we're going to be able to use parkland dedication, and so that's space that we can be thinking about for parks and open space. Anything beyond that, we would have to think about other strategies or mechanisms to get additional space. So tonight, a lot of the ideas you'll hear about, we try to associate size with them so you can start to think about those sizes relative to that 9 acres. And then thinking, well, if I really would, if we'd like to see more than the 9 acres, there may be some hard choices that have to be made in the future. And there's one table that will discuss trade-offs. So you'll see these later tonight as well, but these are just some estimates of sizes of different types of parks or open space that people have expressed interest in for this site. So the trade-offs of more space, if there is a desire for more space, somebody has to pay for that. Somebody has to acquire the land, somebody has to pay to put in the capital improvements of the parks and open space, to maintain it. From a development standpoint, they are usually running an equation to figure out kind of how much development the site will have in order to make it worth investing in. And if more of the land is being set aside for open space, it's can be expected that then the land that remains there that's not open space, the density of that land would go up. So it's sort of across the site, you have a certain amount of development, and if you put in more open space, you squeeze it. And we talked about that concept in the early planning in those scenarios. The scenarios that have the taller buildings tended to have more open space because that was a trade-off decision being considered in that scenario. And also to remember just the site, you're balancing overall environmental, social, economic prerogatives of the public and private sector, and so those are all being balanced against one another. So next up, Kathleen Anglo from our Parks Department is going to introduce you to a little background information and then go over the topics that will be covered at the tables tonight. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kathleen Anglo. I'm a landscape architect in Parks and Recreation. I've been working on the Ford site since about 2009, so I had the privilege of working with the task force and working with Merit and PD on the open space guidelines planning as well. So it's been really great to see this project move forward, and I feel like we're getting there. So I just wanted to start off by showing you a map of the Highland community and what existing parks and open space you already have. So just to give you a couple little things, about 770 acres of passive recreation in Hidden Falls, Crosby Farm, part of Highland Park. You have the Highland Park Community Center. Homecroft Park is your only neighborhood park. And then Highland Park itself, a larger community park that offers golf, aquatics, picnicking, those sorts of things. So that's kind of where we are now. And like Merritt said, there's been a ton of plans that have been done. Some directly relating to the Ford site, some that are peripheral to the Ford site, but definitely have an impact on what happens. So we have to look at all those plans, studies, and look at all the goals, strategies, principles, and everything, and try to get those down to what we consider our bigger goals for prioritizing open space on the site. So out of those things, we've kind of come up with these larger buckets of, we have to foster what we have. And so how does the existing open space help the new development in our community? And then we have to connect those spaces. And then we have to create new spaces that help serve the new development and the existing Highland community. So with that, I'll start with Highland Park Community Center. So our design goal for this would be to create a really strong bicycle and pedestrian connection from the Ford site to the community center. And we just recently did renovations to the community center. I don't think it's going to be moving in the next 20 years. So how do we really strengthen that connection? And we're also looking at reinvesting in that community center as well. So putting forward requests to replace the play area, replace the athletic fields. So fostering that and strengthening that connection. So one of the questions we can discuss tonight is, where and how can we do that? So the next thing in Mississippi River Boulevard. So that's a parkway that's been in our system for over 100 years. We'd like to maintain the aesthetic of that parkway and limit street intersections to the parkway, but also provide views to the river when those streets do intersect. And also look at reworking the trail connections from Ford Parkway to Mississippi River Boulevard. And some of the questions we can kind of think of is, could we relocate the road a little bit to the east to provide more space along the bluff side? What design considerations would be important if we wanted to add a trail on the east side of the boulevard between Ford Parkway and Hidden Falls? Hidden Falls Regional Park. So we need to create a stronger connection to this park. It's a great amenity, and it seems like it's so separated from the rest of the community. So creating that direct connection between the park and the rest of the community, connecting the falls with a stream that runs through the Ford site, reducing stormwater runoff. So right now all of the stormwater comes out of, I don't know if you can see it in the top picture, the culvert from that Ford site, and it's created a lot of damage in the stream downstream from the falls. So what can we do on the site to reduce that damage? And then improving the park entrance from Mississippi River Boulevard as well. And then also at the topic tables, just discussing, are there other ways that Hidden Falls can really complement and support what's being done at the Ford site and create a stronger connection to the community. And so talking about connections, so creating a greenway corridor through the site that really links all of these parks and open spaces together. It should be a multifunctional corridor, so it'd have a bike and a pedestrian trail, maybe stormwater management, create habitat, and then also have a stream that would connect to the falls. And then also offer a connection to the Highland community to Hidden Falls, and then a connection from Ford Parkway to a future possible trail on the CP rail line. And then questions, is that corridor only bike and pedestrian, or is it more like Minnehaha Parkway, where it's a road, it's a trail, it's a stream, and it's all done in that parkway feel? So some new spaces proposed for the site. So one would be a civic square. So civic square would be something like Mears Park, but it would be design goal that would be located kind of peripheral to the Ford site, so it really connects to the Highland Village retail and core space, and then whatever new development may happen on the Ford site. So it creates that bond between those two spaces. Located near Ford Parkway, so something like tables and chairs for dining. Maybe it has convertible streets for deliveries only, and then those streets become event spaces, festivals, markets, things like that. That generally takes up about 1.5 to 3 acres. And I guess tonight we would just like to know what sort of programmatic activities you would like to see in that space. Again, a new space would be a neighborhood park. So this park would serve neighborhood functions for the Ford development, but also be connected to the Highland community along the Greenway corridor. So multifunctional, located probably internal to the site. And again, we're just looking for what kind of programmatic activities are important to you that you'd like to see happen here. So the Little League fields. So we think design goals for the fields would that be located on a major road, buffered from residential areas, takes up about 10 acres of space, needs adjacent support facilities, but also considering that right now the Little League fields are a private recreation facility. So, and it was out of the open space guidelines, it was a main priority that those fields be retained, but we'd also, if they could be retained as a private recreation facility, then it wouldn't have to eat into the parkland dedication acreage. So, and then just what other considerations may be important for location of the fields, and just thinking about land acquisition and development costs as well. Highland is short on athletic fields overall, even with the Little League fields as they are. Very high demand field space in Highland. So again, kind of the same design goals as the Little League fields, but what kind of fields should they be? We usually like to do multifunctional fields, so it's, you know, softball with soccer, but also lacrosse, rugby, and then now we're starting to see more multicultural sports emerge, and how can those facilities be done on the site. So, in considerations for locations of those as well. So I'll have Merritt come back up and kind of explain how the rest of the night will go. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. All right, before I get into explaining everything on the next 2 slides, I want to acknowledge Mike Richardson, who is a coworker who worked very hard with Kathleen and I and some other staff to put this presentation together, and he is sick. He is not able to be here tonight, but I wanted to recognize him with a picture so that you know that there was someone else that worked really hard, and he wanted to make it clear that he has not passed away. He is still alive, so you'll probably see him at the next meeting. So you just heard about a lot of priorities and ideas for open space at the Ford site and in Highland. So again, I have to be the bearer of bad news and say we can't do it all. But we want to have a conversation tonight and hear your input on some of these different ideas and choices, how we could do them. And at one of the tables, you're going to be asked to kind of prioritize between the ideas. You know, if we have limited space and we have to pick one thing over another or 2 things over a couple other things, where do you think that dedication should be utilized? And remembering that different things take up different amounts of space. So we can do a number of them, but the bigger ones, in particular, the athletic fields, are challenging. And so around athletic fields, we're asking you to think kind of beyond the site as well. And so there are some maps on those boards. So if you have ideas of other places in the community you think should be considered for trying to meet that need, you can indicate that on the map or write a note. So we're about to have you get up and move to the tables. And then you circulate between the tables at your leisure and read about the information, provide your input on things. You can sketch however you want to provide that feedback. Each table's different, and there will be a person at each table to kind of help you navigate what the questions are at that table and what sort of feedback we're hoping for. There are the 8 different topics. Chat with one another and do whatever engagement is at the table. Stay connected beyond tonight. This is how you can reach our website, our Facebook page. If you're into tweeting, the city does do some tweeting. We haven't done any really around this project, but if you think we should, you can tell us so. We send a newsletter once a month with an update on what's happening and then notices of upcoming meetings. Thank you.